Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Caliber 30 M1 Carbine, that is. The M1 Carbine, where once it was beloved the world over, still is. Now, in the social media sphere, people like to complain about how it's jam-o-matic, or it's just a rifle that served well in World War II, and it's treated like it's some sort of old relic that needs to just be hung up on the wall. When in fact, it's every bit as good as any modern carbine, and in some places, even better. So let's take a look at it as a rifle. What we have here is a semi-automatic carbine that uses detachable box magazines, and the caliber is rather interesting. This is the 30 caliber carbine caliber. This right here is not a pistol round. This is a 110 grain projectile being accelerated to 1900 feet per second. That's better than 9mm, better than 45, and better than 7.62x25 Tokarev. And yet, people like to say it's a jumped up pistol round. It's a little weaker than 8mm Kurtz. And you've got detachable box magazines. People say these are crap. In my experience, these things work flawlessly. I have magazines from a variety of different manufacturers, and they all work. This right here is my one USGI mag, and it works great. I suppose if you drop them on concrete, they might break. Oh dear. Ergonomics on this rifle are nothing short of exceptional. We've got a very well-designed fire control group here. Trigger is a little heavy, but that's to be expected. This is a military carbine. Safety is even better than something on the Garand. It's easy to toggle on and off with one finger. You don't have to break your firing grip. You've got the magazine catch here. Don't have to break your firing grip. Magazines are not drop free. They snap in just like an AR-15 magazine, and they pull out not like an AR-15 magazine, but if you care about mag retention, this does work for that purpose. Now, you can see that I put a red dot on this rifle. This rifle right here weighs 5.5 pounds. Overall length is about the same as your typical 16-inch AR-15 or 16-inch AK. Those rifles have 16-inch barrels, but their muzzle devices will be about 2 inches beyond that, so this is about the right size of carbine. Unlike with the M1 Garand, you can mount an optic on this quite easily. The biggest problem with mounting an optic on an M1 Garand is you've already got a 10-pound rifle, and imagine sticking a Picatinny rail at the end of that and then a red dot. It's going to make a front-heavy rifle. Front-heavy rifle? I think my brain stopped working. It makes a front-heavy rifle that much more front-heavy. Whereas with this, it's already light, already svelte, and that only adds a few ounces. Now, this does weigh half again as much as the wood handguard, but believe me, this red dot here is a significant force multiplier. This rifle does not have a last round bolt hold open, but you can, like with AK magazines, get last round bolt hold open mags. This, of course, works pretty well because it's always good to know when your rifle is empty. This also does have a manual bolt hold open, just like what one would find on a 1022. Although I have to say I prefer this manual bolt hold open because it's a lot easier to understand. Although if you practice a little bit, you can figure out the manual bolt hold open on the 1022. Now, you can get 30-round magazines for this rifle, and these do work, and you don't have to download them to 25 rounds. Why? Because this particular rifle right here has the upgraded magazine catch, which gives the 30-round magazines that much more support. If you don't have that mag catch, get it, and then you can use these. Because if you don't have it, this actually hangs down just a little bit, and that means the bolt won't be able to pick up the next cartridge. Now, what we have right here is a 1943 manufactured Inland carbine. Inland manufactured the vast majority of M1 carbines. This would later get a post-war refurbishment at Rock Island Arsenal, not to be confused with Rock Island Armory, the makers of the excellent 1911 A1 clones. Now, some of the things they upgraded was the rear sight. Originally, this was a flip sight where you could go from, I think, 200 yards to 300, something along those lines, and it was not adjustable. Often those were not zeroed, and they would cause all sorts of problems. Whereas this, you can actually adjust it for windage, which is very good, which means you might actually be able to hit with this bloody thing. This rear sight is okay, not as good as a red dot, but it's adequate. We, of course, have the aforementioned M2 magazine catch, but we also have the potbelly stock. This gave a little bit of gripping surface and deleted this bit of wood that would stick up here. That bit of wood that would stick up there could potentially protect the action, but it could also break, which would not be very good. But the most visually distinctive part of this upgrade package was the bayonet lug. Was a bayonet really all that useful on a rifle like this? Who's to say? Does look cool, so there is that. Disassembly of this rifle is nothing short of exceptional, and is actually better in some respects than on a modern rifle, and far better than the clockwork monstrosity of the M1 Garand. All you gotta do is take a screwdriver and undo this screw, pop in that barrel band, the bayonet lug pulls forward, and the whole action just comes completely out of the stock. You do not want to unscrew this because this actually just stays on the stock. Just pull all that out. There is one pin on the trigger group that kind of likes to fall out, and then all the parts just kind of come apart. It's a little finicky getting it back together, but it makes sense. Really, disassembling this thing is about like disassembling an AK. It's pretty bloody easy if you know what you're doing. So, why don't people talk about this rifle? This is really quite the Wunderwaffe, especially when you compare it to, say, an M1 Garand or a Thompson submachine gun. The big issue with this is this was supposed to be the rear echelon rifle. And I'm not going to repeat it, but every goddamn social media influencer will talk about how this was the cook and clerk gun, although they don't use those terms, but I'm so sick of hearing them. And that's true to a point, but combat troops also love these. They love these a lot, because what you have is intermediate caliber, detachable box magazine. So you had that, and in a war where your primary rifle was either a bolt action or a big ass battle rifle that had an 8-round on block clip. Now, it's something to be said about full power battle rifle cartridges. However, the AR-15 is king. Everybody in every country, even the mother Russians, wants an AR-15. So, did the intermediate cartridge win? I should think so. And yet, when people talk about the M1 Carbine, it's like, yes, it was weak. If this is weak, then what's a 9mm? What's a 45? How is that stronger than this? At range, even. And then if this is weak, wouldn't 5.56 also be weak? Shouldn't we go back to 308? Even though nobody who actually has to do any actual fighting wants to do that. But whatever. The FUD lore built around this rifle is about as bad as the FUD lore built around the AR-15. Although, sadly, this did not get the reputation resurrection that the AR-15 got. In fact, many of the people around the AR-15 reputation resurrection hate this carbine, and I'm not really sure why. They are certainly affluent enough to get something like this, an actual M1 carbine that works. But whatever. That's just the way of things, isn't it? You do everything right, and people still think you're terrible. But whatever. One of the reasons why the M1 Carbine has kind of a dubious reputation today is because all the good M1 carbines were bought up by all the boomers. They love this rifle because it's great. It's a 5.5 pound rifle that shoots a very soft shooting cartridge with very small and portable magazines. Smaller, in fact, than the AR-15 magazines. Here we have a 30 rounder. This is 30 rounds of a pretty potent cartridge, and it's not necessarily a fraction the size of an AR-15 mag, but still pretty bloody small in comparison. And they loved them. And people still love them today, and they don't want to sell them. They'll sell a Garand. Oh, hell yeah, they'll sell a Garand. They're not going to sell one of these. Finding this thing was really tough for me because I live in Houston, Texas, which is a massive city, and yet I was able to find one. And I just gave up and bought it from Royal Tiger and was blessed by the Omniscia and got a good one. One of the things that happened with the boomers was you couldn't get these for a very long time because these were military rifles. People wanted these in militaries because they were that good. They didn't care about the Garands. They wanted these. These were good. And so what ended up happening is companies tried to fill the void. But these are very expensive rifles to manufacture. You know, you can't just churn out these kind of receivers and parts just at your local gun shop. You can't do it. You need, like, General Motors to do that. A lot of it to make it in any way economical. And so a lot of these little fly-by-night companies made bad receivers. They actually bought up a bunch of surplus barrels for the 1903 Springfield, cut them in half, and then like welded parts together. It was the weirdest thing. They would basically build their crappy receivers. There'd be a barrel extension. They would take this 1903 barrel, weld it, and pin it. I would not want to shoot such a thing. And today, today's modern day manufacturers, the modern day Inland, that's just the name, not actual General Motors, and Auto Ordnance, that's just the name, not actual Auto Ordnance, theirs that they manufacture, well, for one, their receivers are manufactured by the same company. They are cast, which may not necessarily be a bad thing, but they're poorly machined, and so they don't really work right. And if you add poorly machined receivers, poorly done barrels, and then bad mags, and it's not hard to get good mags. This is an original USGI that came with the rifle, and this is a KCI magazine, $11.99 from Gun Mag Warehouse. This thing functioned flawlessly. But imagine if you bought an Auto Ordnance mag or something like that, which is actually more expensive than these. Imagine if you bought that, put it in a poorly machined gun. Well, of course it's not going to work. But if you have the real deal and a good mag, then of course it's going to work. But that's the thing. Some of the social media influencers will base their opinion on something like this on a poorly manufactured modern day repro, which just, it doesn't work. Now, if you want to get a modern day repro that doesn't suck, you're gonna have to pay a lot of money. A modern day repro with a good receiver manufactured by LMT of all things will run you $2,000. This thing here was a small dump truck full of money. A Fulton Armory M1 Carbine, that'll run you 2 dump trucks full of money. So there you go. So, ladies and gentlemen, the M1 Carbine, we're going to stop yapping and we're going to start shooting. We're going to be putting it through its paces. Oh yes. The red dot optic we have on here is a Primary Arms micro dot. It's basically a budget Holosun. It's not quite as good as a Holosun, but it's like $50 cheaper, and I want my $50. I have this on a wide variety of different firearms, from the AK to, I think the SKS also has this as well. But these things work. Glass could be a little bit better, but if you want a little bit better, pay the $130 for a Holosun. I'm perfectly happy with it. It's perfectly bright during the day, and it's just a very nice, durable optic. One problem with this handguard, though, this is an Ultimac handguard. It's pretty pricey, too, but it's worth it. Clamps right to the barrel, so when you disassemble this rifle, you don't have to take the optic off to clean the rifle. You can just stay on there. You don't lose zero, but this heats up fast, and the optic heats up. But I did not have any zero shifts, at least at 100 yards. I'm sure if I tried to shoot this out further, I'd have a lot of problems, but this was never designed as a 500-yard gun. Now, today we're going to be using the one USGI and a bunch of KCI magazines ranging from the 30s to the 15s. The ammo we're going to be using today is 110 grain, PMC manufactured, South Korean military surplus. This is one of those things where you had to jump on this as fast as possible, and I barely was able to get sufficient stock of ammo before it was all sold out. And even then, this stuff was pretty expensive. That's the one big downfall of the M1 Carbine, is ammo is a bit hard to find in the post-Gundamic world. Now, we're going to be shooting this at a variety of ranges, from a fairly close 7 yards all the way out to 100 yards. There's going to be shooting with the original iron sights and with the red dot. So with that, let's lock and load and have a hell of a lot of fun. And now you see why this rifle costs a dump truck full of money. What you have here is a very accurate, very reliable, very light at 5.5 pounds rifle that does that. And all it needed was a red dot. I did adequately with the iron sights, but the aperture is a little coarse, and I've never been that great with iron sights to begin with, but for my very first shots out of this rifle, I was still able to hit a target at 25 yards. That is pretty damn good. Now, I was able to actually put a 0 on this red dot in about 3 shots. That was actually easier than on my AR-15. I'm not really sure why, but whatever. I'm not complaining. This thing did shoot a little low, but I could have also had my hold off a little bit wrong, but whatever. Still able to get really good hits at the 100-yard line. This rifle I've kind of fallen in love with. It's my baby. I mean, it's that good. It's that good. Did not have a single malfunction in 200 rounds. As you can see, one of the mags was a little gritty, I think, and that's why I kind of had to give the bolts a little bit of force to get it to close. But as you can also see, not a single malfunction. It ran it perfectly. Now, what is the purpose of the M1 Carbine in the space year 2021? It is basically, it straddles the line between PDW and semi-automatic carbine. It doesn't have quite the ballistic capability of 5.56, but it's far better than 9mm or 45. And it's lighter than all of those. So where does it fit? What category do you go into? And what it goes into is, if you want like the ultimate PDW, this kind of is it. And the reason I say that it kind of is it over like, say, a modern day 300 Black or Shorty AR is because you don't have that muzzle blast, and this is going to be lighter than even a Shorty 300 Black carbine. The magazines are going to be lighter and more portable, and if portability is something you're concerned about, this works pretty well. And in terms of weight, it also works really well in general. This is kind of like Lotz tech in some respects. Like, it's Lotz tech. You cannot make one of these economically today, and it still works better than the more economical alternatives. But does it work enough better? That is the question. And really, that's only something you can answer with a dump truck full of money. Now, if you want a cheaper alternative, one does exist, and that is a 300 Blackout carbine that will be about as portable as something like this. It'll have a little lower recoil than, say, 5.56, and it'll be very good for the ranges that this was designed to operate at. But alternatively, you're going to have bigger mags, which are going to be heavier. It's going to be a little less portable, but it will be sufficient. I do not recommend trying to emulate this with, say, a 10-inch AR, as with a 10-inch AR, you're really on the razor's edge of reliability, and you could be having massive amounts of recoil and muzzle blast and concussion. It's not going to work, whereas 300 Black doesn't really give you that issue. But if you have a dump truck full of money, you can't really do better than what this thing does. It would be really nice if this could be remade in an economical fashion where you could get these things down to like $1,000. I think it would have been very fascinating to see what could have been done with 30 caliber carbine. There were some Wildcat cartridges from like the 1970s where this was actually necked down to a 22 caliber, and evidently it was pretty good, but sadly it went nowhere. The big problem is the AR-15 is just 100% sufficient. It's going to be heavier than this, the ammo's going to be heavier, but it can still do what this was originally intended to do. What's kind of fascinating is there has been this desire to go back to a lighter rifle. The What Would Stoner Do carbine attempts to basically make the AR-15 as light as this, and it succeeds in that purpose. It's actually kind of funny that a lot of the complaints about this carbine would later be seen in the more modern M4 carbine used by the United States Army. The M4 carbine, the military wanted a lighter AR, a more portable AR, and yet people were saying it was unreliable, inaccurate, and the bullets didn't do anything. It's just kind of funny that there is a interesting dichotomy between both past and present in that regard. At the end of the day, was this rifle inaccurate and unreliable? From my experience with this rifle, with the ammo that I used, with the magazines that I used, at the ranges I used it at, this was not inaccurate or unreliable. This thing was everything the original designers wanted it to be, and all it takes is a new handguard and a red dot to make it perfectly modern. There is nothing on this thing that is old to a modern shooter. The ergonomics are right. Yeah, you have a wood stock, but it's light, and it's not as though it's hard to get used to a wood stock. It's very easy to disassemble. Like it's easier to disassemble this than the PC Carbine. I even gotta like gush about the sling. I love this sling. You wrap it around the oiler, which I think is hilarious that the oiler is in the stock. I mean, that's almost Russian. It's just like, this rifle is amazing. It is worth the dump truck full of money you have to buy. And I think that's why, you know, like with the Browning High Power, people are going to buy these things up and the price is never going to go down. Which, you know what? For as good as this rifle is, it's worth it. Those who know it's good. Those who don't know can sit around complaining, and we'll just go out and have some fun. And so, I have been the illustrious GeneralLotz, and this has been my illustrious M1 Carbine. And I'm going to wish you good M1 Carbine and good M1 Garand, whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.